Will Georgia miss this year's playoff? That's what someone at ESPN thinks. ESPN Insider. It looks like it's David Hale who put together some hot takes. He's got some interesting ones. We'll talk about some of the other hot takes because I think they're interesting, but had a hot take about Georgia. He thinks, hey, look, there's a real chance that the Dogs do not make this year's college football playoff. Real quick, a few days ago, we learned that the college football playoff seeding is changing, right? The top 4 conference champions are not necessarily the teams that are going to earn the byes now. The 4 teams that earn bye weeks will just be the teams that are ranked 1 through 4. Conference champions still guaranteed a spot in the playoff, those top 4 or 5 of them, but you're not guaranteed a bye. The SEC champion will almost certainly get a bye because it's hard to see the SEC champion not ranked in the top 4 of the college football playoff. Georgia was both last year, earned a bye, despite having a season that was, a step down from the previous 3. Georgia dominated college football from 2021 to 2023. That 3-season stretch where the Dogs lost 2 games, and they were both SEC championships. They were not regular; they were postseason games, both to Alabama. Georgia did not lose to any other program during that 3-year stretch. They broke records. They had all sorts of first-round draft picks, all that. And then it was a step down last year. The first year of the expanded college football playoff. The first year of expanded SEC to 16 teams. And it was more difficult. And Georgia's team at the end of the day just wasn't quite as good as it was the previous 3 seasons where they went back-to-back and were knocking on the door of a 3rd national championship. The team just wasn't as good, right? And there were distractions. And the season was more difficult, and Georgia lost games. I think it's still going to be really, really difficult. That's what everyone seems to be on the same page about. What people aren't on the same page about is how good is this Georgia team going to be? How good is Georgia going to be moving forward with these changes in college football? Seems like Hale, who I know, and he's a good writer over there at ESPN, it seems like he thinks there's a good chance that the Dogs miss out on this next dance, right? They call March Madness a dance. Well, now there's a college football dance when we're talking about 12 teams and potentially 16 teams in a couple of seasons. Let's get into what he had to say, some of these other hot takes, and really examine what's it going to take for Georgia to miss the playoff, and is that realistic compared to what we saw last season? Sometimes it's difficult to compare because, look, this Georgia team is going to be different, and I'm not how much do I take away from the Tech game, the Alabama game last year? You know what I mean? But we'll get into it. Ryan Curley from Dawg Post. Make sure you're checking out dawgpost.com. People still read nowadays, right? There's good literature over there from me, Dean, and Matt. Just go and check it out. This is what let's break down the breakdown of why Georgia might miss the playoff according to David. For the better part of 3 seasons, the Bulldogs seemed invincible. Only an injury-plagued 1-score loss to Alabama in the 23 SEC title game may have prevented Georgia from winning 3 straight national championships, and yet by the end of 2024, it was clear some of the shine was off the once dominant program. And yet by the end of 2024, it was, Carson Beck struggled without much help from his skill positions. The Dogs lost to Alabama, they were whooped by Ole Miss, and nearly fell to Georgia Tech before escaping in 8 overtimes. By the time Notre Dame eased past Georgia in the Sugar Bowl, it was pretty clear Kirby didn't have a championship-level team. I'm going to take a timeout on the quote there. We were, especially us at Dawg Post throughout the season, we're very skeptical that was a championship-level team throughout the year. When you think about the close call with Kentucky early on, right? First of all, it looks like a championship-level team when it beats the brakes off of Clemson in the second half and wins 34-3 in the opening game. But then 2 weeks later, you go up to Lexington and almost don't score, right? A late touchdown, 13-12. It was rough. Georgia couldn't move the football. And then they lose the wild game in Alabama the next week. And it's like, okay, well, they almost lost the week before, and now they're losing this game. They got boat race in the first half. Immediately, you had questions about how good Georgia really was going to be. Ultimately, they struggled throughout the season. And look, winning the SEC championship was somewhat of a surprise. I think that a lot of people can agree that Georgia kind of outperformed what it was during the regular season. When you go and you bring home the SEC title and you get a playoff bye, yeah, I mean, I think that was a little bit of an overperformance for how shaky this Georgia team was. They did almost lose to Georgia Tech. in 8 overtimes. They did get destroyed by Ole Miss. So I don't know, right? They go 10-2. They go 11-2 after winning the SEC championship. Now they lose 2 road games. And the difference is these games are going to be at home. Now they're still going to be very difficult, but the more challenging games for Georgia are now going to be at home. And they also don't have to deal with a neutral site against a team as good as Clemson, right? So that gets taken off, and that one extra difficult game is not on the schedule. So you look at the schedule, it's much more favorable for Georgia, which is why this take is hotter, right? That's why we're discussing this hot take. Let's go back to the quote. Will 2025 be a return to greatness? It's possible, but the SEC is stacked, and with games at Tennessee, home versus Bama, Texas, Ole Miss, and the rivalry showdown versus Florida, there are ample opportunities to stumble. Is 8-4 possible? Would a 9-3 Georgia be a sure bet for the playoff? Could things get worse? When the standard is dominance, it's hard to maintain the standard for a long in today's college football. I don't disagree with the end part there. The standard is dominance. We talked about it with Joel Klatt recently, what he had to say, and having Georgia at number 8, and how he almost didn't feel comfortable having Georgia ranked preseason number 8 in his way too early rankings. And part of that was, he doesn't know if the roster is going to be better. He doesn't know if Gunnar Stockton's going to be better. But because Georgia's had this standard of dominance, you want to put them up higher. But it's also one of those things where it's like a catch-22. Now that that's the standard, the expectations are harder to meet. And that's the difficult thing for Georgia and for Kirby. When I think about this regular season, all right, what would it take to miss the playoff? 9-3, right? 9-3 probably. Well, do they lose 3 games? Marshall and Austin Peay, those are wins, right? Most likely. At Tennessee, look, I know this is one of the tougher places to play in college football. I would predict at this point in time that Georgia wins that game on the road, and that'll be a big win. It'll probably be a night game. Look, the Vols dealt with some offseason drama and are going through a quarterback change. And look, as much as I think Nico Iamaleava is not quite the 5-star that he was rated to be coming out of high school, there's still a reason why he was the starter, right? And they're moving on from that. And I think already moving on from a lot of talent that made them who they were. That's the case for Georgia, but their talent isn't quite as good in terms of replenishing. Alabama at home. Will Kirby get the monkey off his back, beat Alabama in the regular season? They beat Alabama in the national championship a few years ago, but it's just been tough sledding before that and since that. And last year's game was dramatic. I think a home night game is probably is in Georgia's favor, right? Kentucky at home should be a win. At Auburn, I think Auburn will improve this year. I know it's one of the toughest places to play. I think Auburn is just not as good as Georgia, and I think they go on the road and do that. So I'm looking at this. I don't really see a loss in the first half of the schedule. Now, 2 road games, maybe they split one. Let's say they split them, right? Let's say they lose to Auburn or Tennessee. We're talking about 5-1. Versus Ole Miss at home, I think they win that. I think that they do beat Florida. I think they beat Mississippi State on the road. Let's say they lose to Texas at home. Let's just say that. And then they beat Charlotte, Georgia Tech. Well, that's 10-2, and that's me kind of thinking it's going to be more like 11-1. So I think there's a reason why this take was categorized in the hot take category. Georgia's schedule is more favorable. There are expected improvements among Georgia's roster, and I think that when you look at this thing, they've got, 3 true road games? Only 3. They've got a neutral site, a couple neutral sites, but one's the one that happens every year against Florida. But at Mississippi State, which should be a win, at Auburn and at Tennessee, Georgia's just better than these teams. So, look, I have a hard time seeing Georgia not be ranked in the top 12 at the end of the season. I just do. Some of these other hot takes. Belichick is one and done at North Carolina. Arch Manning doesn't win the Heisman. Is that a hot take? I know he's the favorite, but is that such a hot take when we haven't seen that much of him? Ohio State loses to Michigan again. That's certainly a hot take. I don't know about it 5 times in a row. Lincoln Riley saves his job at USC. Florida State wins 10 games. I would say that's a hot take. They brought in Thomas Castellanos, the quarterback from Boston College. I believe he is a former Georgia high school player. They're switching up a lot, right? Florida State's season was disastrous a year ago. There's a new power in Texas. Texas Tech. Okay. I guess he's predicting Texas Tech will have an improved season. Kent State's streak reaches 34. Not good streak for the Zips. So, all right, some of these hot takes are pretty much out there. And to me, Georgia missing the playoff is the hottest one out of all of them. I think I have a hard time saying that. It's kind of the best way that I would put it. I have a hard time seeing Georgia not make the college football playoff. We'll be with you every day here on YouTube, and make sure you're checking out the site at dawgpost.com. Appreciate you for watching.